The Winnipeg Jets have finally won a game, and it didn't involve only the top line, finally getting depth scoring and good saves from their goalie, Eric Comrie.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support, especially as you have helped to make Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network. Tonight's episode, obviously, we're talking a little bit about Winnipeg versus Buffalo. This game just wrapped up not too long ago, and the Jets came away with a 4-1 victory. But there were probably some points of excitement and some points of concern. We'll talk about both in equal measure, get prepared for Winnipeg versus Edmonton tomorrow evening, which we'll talk about next weekend. And then, of course, we have some interesting stuff to talk about with respect to Scott Arniel continuing to try and find line combinations that can produce goals without splitting the top line. Before we dive into all that, though, I did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, Jets, Sabres, this was a chance for Winnipeg to try and get a measure of revenge after being humiliated earlier this week. The road game against Buffalo didn't go according to plan, and if you watched it, you probably saw a Jets team that was from top to bottom, outskated, outplayed, and outworked. And it wasn't for a lack of effort. The Jets did actually try to put up a pretty tough fight against the Sabres team. They just didn't have the team speed. And I think a lot of the mistakes, whether it was turnovers or missed defensive assignments, all of that stuff sort of fed into a lot of frustration. And the team just really did not have it in a very generous way. Tonight's game, I don't think was quite as different as I would hope it was. The scoreline obviously was flipped, but I think if you watched how these two teams played, you saw a lot of what happened to the Jets in the first game. Buffalo was very fast in transition. Their puck movement and passing and distribution was crisp in many respects, and they very quickly got up the ice and created some very dangerous chances. This was probably one of Eric Comrie's busier games of the season, 34 saves on 35 shots. It was a tough night for him, but despite some extremely chaotic moments in the crease and a couple of really good shots from Buffalo, the Jets did try and probably suffocate that slot area a little bit, block as much as they could. I don't think they quite shut down as many opportunities as they would have liked. The Sabres still had some reasonable chances in the slot area, but, given what happened in the first game, it was an improvement. It didn't quite start out that way, though. Buffalo definitely had the early advantage. They already had like 4 or 5 shots by the time the Jets got there first. And after all of that, after Winnipeg spent several shifts hemmed in its own end, the Sabres made one mistake on their own defensive zone exit early into the first, and the top line did what the top line does, taking advantage. Kyle Connor getting his 15th goal of the season, and the Jets' first line just continuing to reinforce a lot of the arguments for people who say they shouldn't split it up. And I saw that after the game. I think people, again, continue to miss the point of why you probably need to do this for the health of the team if you're talking about trying to claw back into the playoffs. A lot of folks think it won't help, but the reality is what you saw for a lot of this game was that many of the Jets' other lines could not win their matchups. And I think Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele are both good enough to drive their own buses. Let them do it separately, and I think you'll get a little bit more balance across your top 9. But obviously, the Jets are probably not going to go with that plan, especially as long as the top line continues to do what the top line does. I thought this game was probably one of Taves' worst games so far. He really just hasn't been a factor for Winnipeg. And, obviously it was amazing that he's even come back to the league, but I think we kind of know where his game is at this point. 2 years off the ice, it's been tough sledding. And I think it's really forced the Jets to reevaluate what his role is. He was actually playing wing at one point in this game because Winnipeg just could not have him continuing to struggle down the middle. An offensive zone penalty, a giveaway that almost had an easy Sabres goal right in front of Comrie. It just wasn't a great night. So they tried to move him around. But amidst all that, the Jets have lived or died by the top line. Not tonight, though. For the first time, Winnipeg finally got goals that weren't just the first three players. The top line has accounted for about 50% of this year's goals, which is, both a little bit funny and also a little bit scary if you're talking about the playoffs. Winnipeg needs more distributed goal scoring. It can't be Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde on literally every single goal. So for once, the fourth line actually carried the way here. Tanner Pearson had a breakaway thanks to a really weird move by Alex Tuck at the blue line. He kind of ran into one of his own skaters. It created an opportunity for Pearson and Koepke to break away, and Pearson did not miss. Man can still shoot, even if some of his other aspects and attributes haven't quite kept up as he's aging. Cole Koepke also cashed in on a great little deke around Luukkonen at the other end. Of course, Koepke has been snake-bitten, despite getting some of the best chances on the fourth line, even, a clear goal-scoring chance here and there. He actually got his first of the season. You could see how relieving it was for him and how excited he was. Good to see him get rewarded and hit pay dirt after, a lot of effort and a lot of work that has unfortunately led to some highlight reel almost goals. But now he's got one. Monkey is off the back. We also saw a penalty shot, and given the rule, I technically understand the awarding of the penalty shot for Lowry, but a lot of times when you see, a player restrained near the neutral zone, it's usually more like a penalty and not a penalty shot. So this game had it all. Pretty crazy. Gabriel Velarde ended up getting an empty netter, and Scheifele got an assist after he had a goal chalked off earlier in the third period. Honestly, the top line probably deserved 3 or 4 goals. I thought they played extremely well. And it was just nice to see that they didn't have to be the only ones to try and put the puck past the opposing keeper. Somebody else was finally able to do it. Unfortunately, the middle six continues to be an issue. There's just not really a lot of offense from this unit, and I don't really want to count on the fourth line being the one to carry the burden, right? So it'll be interesting. This team is trying to survive really with one line of goal scoring. In the modern NHL, that's basically impossible, but the Jets are going to have to try it anyways because there's probably not a lot of help coming otherwise, and Winnipeg seems very adamant that this is their best approach to trying to make it through the season. I would be very shocked if they get far doing that, but, best of luck to them. Arniel has apparently been thinking about trying to split them up, but for one reason or another, this team is very afraid to do it. So we'll see how many wins they can get. There's probably the bit of me that's morbidly curious to see how many wins one line can get you. So far, it's done an okay job, but I don't really think it's playoff worthy. And this is despite the fact that Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele have put up some of the best performances of their whole career already. And yet it still might not be enough because there's just not enough support elsewhere on the roster. So, obviously we're about a third of the way through the year, so it's not like we can sit here and say small sample sizes anymore. This is what we're going to have to contend with, and we'll have to wait and see if it's enough to make the postseason. But of course, the Jets are already back in action tomorrow evening, and the test does not get easier with a matchup on the road against the Edmonton Oilers. Let's chat about that coming right up. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's gonna be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Gametime app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Gametime, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. Pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. And you can even see seat views, so you actually know what you're paying for. You also have no hidden fees and no surprise charges at checkout. And when you open the app, all you have to do is just scroll through for some of the best deals on tickets you can find anywhere. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets. Every match, concert, or event you want, it is all with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, Gametime. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are continuing to chat about Winnipeg with a lot of weekend hockey ahead. Quite a bit to get through. Obviously, they managed to get through the Sabres. That game was closer than I think the scoreline led on, but all the same, a win's a win, 2 points that Winnipeg desperately needed if they wanted to stay in this playoff race. As of right now, the Jets are technically back in a second wild card spot, but we all know that the past few weeks there's really not been a lot of ability to maintain firm positioning here. If you drop a single game or two, it can mean the difference between being in wild card 2 and 6th in the wild card race, such as the really tightness of the standings. But the Jets have a big opportunity to try and put one of their opponents a little bit further behind in that wild card 2 race. I don't know that anyone is really relishing the opportunity to be in wild card 2. I think pretty much every team in the league is trying to stay away from it as desperately as possible because, Western wild card 2 is lining up for a bit of a firing squad by the Colorado Avalanche. And I know Dallas has started to round into form lately. They're playing great hockey. But if Dallas is your first seed in the Central at the end of the season, I think you would easily take that over having to line up and just wait for the Colorado Avalanche to turn your goalie into Swiss cheese. Not a particularly great matchup. So the Jets then are going to be playing a team that is probably one of the few that has the top-end talent to skate with Colorado, but obviously for plenty of reasons, they have struggled to really ascend the ranks of the Pacific this division. They were in the Stanley Cup Finals last year. They have not really looked that same team this year. That, of course, is the Edmonton Oilers. They're very talented, don't get me wrong, and they have a lot of underrated players, but it hasn't really coalesced into a particularly great stew, in part because they're just not getting saves. Up front, you've got Nugent Hopkins, McDavid, and Hyman. Then second line, Podkolzin, Draisaitl, and Savoy. Third line, Janmark, Henrique, and Mangiapane. And on the fourth, Klattenberg, Lazar, and Frederick. This fourth line is quite rough in a lot of ways. They forecheck well, they're physical, but, kind of like the Jets, when you look at this bottom six, there's not a ton of high-end offense. Mangiapane and Henrique I do have some time for, and I think, both are pretty solid depth players, but overall, past the top six where you have all your star power, Edmonton isn't that different from the Jets in some ways. They don't have as much offensive support up front, although the two guys that they do have are kind of, best in class sorts of players. And that's probably something that, you compare against the Jets, and they certainly would have the advantage there, especially down the middle. On defense, they've got Ekholm and Bouchard on the first, Nurse and Regula on the second, and Kulak and Emberson on the third pairing. The blue line is okay, but you've seen probably plenty of lowlights of Bouchard and Nurse and company sort of just abandoning their assignments in the slot, ignoring their man below the goal line, not really paying attention, all that fun stuff. The thing with Edmonton's blue line is that it is very offensively oriented, right? They're not going to shut down many opportunities. And even if they did, it probably wouldn't make that much of a difference because their goaltending tandem can't really stop anything. Stuart Skinner, Calvin Pickard, take your choice. It doesn't matter. Goals have been flying in left and right. I didn't quite realize this, but in just 28 games, they've already conceded 100 goals. The only teams that are really in that territory are like the Blues, right? Or the Red Wings. These are teams that have really been struggling as of late. You don't see a ton of top-end contenders conceding 100 goals already. Now, the Oilers have done this song and dance before where they've had a bad start. They recovered. They made the Cup finals. We've done this a couple years in a row. I'm starting to wonder how many times they can keep doing that. McDavid may be slowing down a bit. He doesn't quite have the elite offensive supporting cast that he used to. He's getting closer to 30, and the Oilers just aren't getting better. I think they've maybe peaked. Maybe their past couple of trips to the Cup finals were his best chances to come away with something, and twice they've lost to the Panthers. So, I think Edmonton is maybe seeing diminishing returns during the regular season. It's kind of hard to do better than they have when they've made the Stanley Cup finals twice in a row. But I'm sure that they feel they have unfinished business. And coming into this game against the Jets, obviously Winnipeg's going to be on their back end of a back-to-back. Thomas Milic likely to be in goal. He had a really solid NHL debut, but obviously, still surrendered 5 goals because Winnipeg in front of him didn't really give him a lot of support. Now you're going to have him go against 2 of the league's best shooters in Draisaitl and McDavid. If the Jets are going to take penalties, this is the last game that they want to take more than like 2 or 3. The Edmonton power play is still phenomenal. And yeah, very scary team once they're up at speed. And I think that's where they have a sizable advantage over the Jets. I would not say the Oilers are super fast, comparatively speaking, but their top-end skaters are faster than anything Winnipeg really has. McDavid at top speed, at top stride, basically unstoppable. And that's going to be a bit of a tricky mismatch for the Jets, who really are going to have to hope that they can try and somehow win the depth battles. But, so far the depth battles have even been hard against teams that are, maybe more fringe playoff squads. And Edmonton technically falls in that category, but we know this Oilers team has the talent and top-end skill to where they run McDavid out there like 30 minutes a night, and he just tilts the ice every time he goes out there. So it's going to be a tough matchup, and I don't know that we really will expect too many changes. I'd expect one of Schenn or Miller to come in for Salamonson, most likely. We've seen Arniel rotate a lot of the rookies in and out. Salamonson, for his part, I think has looked pretty solid recently. Some games, he's playing with Stanley, and that those shifts are a little harder on the eyes. Logan is not a partner on the back end in the defensive zone that I think quite suits what Salamonson wants to do. So Elias has to maybe improvise a little bit, but it'll take him time to start getting used to the league. He's still playing sheltered minutes. It is what it is, right? I think some folks were hoping that they would swap him and DeMello and have him play with Morrissey. Probably wouldn't go there just yet. I think the top matchups you would be a little concerned about. Salamonson doesn't win a lot of the physical duels and one-on-ones along the wall, so let him maybe get sheltered minutes first and work his way up. It's not like it's going to make that much of a difference either way in the immediate present. So, I expect maybe Miller to come in. If Schenn comes in, that would be a problem for Winnipeg. You can't have too many slower skaters on this back end, even if they're big and physical. That doesn't work against the Oilers, and it's not going to work in this game. They might be able to survive some of those shifts if Milic is able to make some big saves, but I think we've seen what happens when Winnipeg allows an opponent to keep hemming them in and create opportunities off of turnovers, lost battles, etc. You know the drill. You've seen this team do this stuff before. And, Winnipeg hasn't exactly been the best with puck management, especially in the defensive zone. So this is a big test for the Jets. Winnipeg has clawed back a win here, but we know that in the past 16 games, they have 6 wins, and only 7 games have they gotten points out of that whole run. That is not good enough to make the postseason, and, Hellebuck is still a few weeks away. So we are still in pretty perilous territory here, and I think pretty much everyone in the Winnipeg Jets org knows it. They're trying to pull things together as much as they can. We'll have to see if, they can pull a rabbit out of the hat and get a road win against the Oilers. I would not be too confident in this one, but maybe there's a surprise down the road. Amidst all this, though, we have seen Arniel try to come up with new line combinations, reorganize the middle 6 and bottom 6. Is it working, or is it just kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? We'll chat about that coming right up. The holidays are amazing, but they can also get overwhelming fast. Travel, gifts, parties, year-end expenses, it's really easy to lose track of your money this time of year. That's exactly why Monarch has become such a game changer. If you want to keep your finances under control this holiday season, you need to be using Monarch. Rated Wall Street Journal's best budgeting app of 2025, Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, simple dashboard. The holiday spending category can also become a lifesaver, especially right now. You can see exactly what's left in your gift and travel budget in real time. And you can also make money check-ins simply with a minute or two each week. You're up to speed on what your expenditures look like, how much is coming in and out, and if you've got a partner or a spouse, you can have a shared account so you can always track together and stay on the same page. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are continuing to wrap up real quick with some final thoughts on the Jets reorganizing their middle and bottom lines. Obviously, Winnipeg is trying to squeeze out offense somewhere, right? This team is really sticking to the top line, and in some ways, you can understand why, because they're the only trio that's capable of scoring consistently. On the other hand, it's a really risky approach because you're basically asking, say, 20 to 25 minutes a game for the Jets to win in that minute, in that time frame, right? Out of 60 minutes. That's a lot of pressure on one group of guys consistently, day in and day out. In some time, in some cases it's worked, right? The Jets have come away with more wins than they probably would have expected to, but that was when they had more of a safety net with Hellebuck. They don't have that safety net right now. Comrie and Milic have done about as much as they can, but I think it's asking a lot of this top line to do it for, another 50 plus games. The Jets are going to have to try and figure out something. And Arniel keeps trying to cobble together a lot of different line combinations for 2 through 4, especially the 2 and 3 lines. We've seen everything from Iafallo, Nemesnikov, and Niederreiter to Taves now on the wing. I think the reality is you really don't have much that you can do to make this middle six pop. I just don't know that there's much internally unless you look at the Moose. I think, if you're looking at some of the kids, that might be your best chance to make something happen. But I also wouldn't, sit here and tell you it's a guaranteed thing, it's going to work immediately, or that even if things do improve, it's going to lead to tons of goals. I don't want to go that far. I don't really think that's true. I think it would make it more watchable and a little bit more fun, but I don't think you really solve the simple problem that this team has, where there's just not enough speed and offensive talent to go around, right? You've got a couple of guys who are really putting on career best seasons, and then lots of more defensively oriented forechecking players. And then, you've got the vets who are really struggling to keep up. Nyquist, Taves, Pearson, in most of those games they've played so far, haven't really seen a noticeable impact in a positive sense. So the Jets are asking more and more of the bottom 9 to try and pull their weight. Tonight was a rare opportunity where they've actually made good on it, but usually we haven't really seen that. So the Jets are in a tight position. I think if the Jets want to try this route, they really need to make Lowry your 2C consistently. Adams probably the guy that I think you can really lean on behind Scheifele. Taves obviously has not been great as the 2C. Even in depth roles, he's struggling, and that's not super shocking. Again, we're talking about somebody who has played 27 games in the last 3 years. It's going to take him some time to feel comfortable, and maybe this is just what his level is right now. He's at the age where he's probably closer to retirement, and so lean on some of your core guys who get results. Adam is not going to score lots of goals. We know that. He's not a points magnet. It is what it is. What he does bring is a bruising two-way presence, great forechecking ability, and he opens up space for other guys. I think, his shifts with Perfetti so far have kind of been a little so-so, but it's partly because they're just not comfortable playing with each other yet. I think they're not on the same page. I think the timing's going to take a little bit. Once they start to feel more comfort, I think that could yield some results. But again, it's probably more of a band-aid. I think I personally really want to see Connor and Lowry together. I know that's not going to happen, but we've seen them do that in brief spurts last year, and it had some pretty impressive results. I think Connor can honestly drive his own line, and I used to not really say that before. Now, the past couple of years, he's been elite. Shifley, we know, can drive his own bus. I think you really have to think about trying to spread the wealth, but until that happens, you're going to be rearranging a lot of middle six and bottom six lines that, even with the best of intentions, you probably can't turn into high end offensive units. If I would maybe promote somebody further up the lineup, I guess it'd be Morgan Barron. I think Barron probably has the most offensive upside of anyone on the bottom two lines. Niederreiter could probably play with Shifley. Nino has, in the earlier stages of his career, played in top six deployments. He doesn't score at that rate anymore, but maybe he could keep up and do some solid work along the walls. I mean, again, right, we're talking about trying to make the best of a situation where you don't have a lot of external or internal help to count on coming from other sources. So what you see is what you get. And Winnipeg trying to make something work, it's putting Arniel in a tough spot. I think he's afraid to touch the top line, either because he's not allowed to and they've told him that, or because he's afraid that that's going to be all the goal scoring and anything they do after that is just going to break the team's offense completely. I see the risk, I see the concern, but if there's a time to start rearranging things and figuring out if this maybe is the way to drag your team back into real playoff relevance, this is probably your best chance. I don't think you want to start messing around later in the season. They've got a couple of weeks left before Hellebuck is back. This is your kind of margin for figuring things out before you start getting into the deeper parts of the season and experimentation becomes impossible. They've already had to experiment more than I think they ever expected with all the injuries. You still have a chance to try some new things and see what sticks. At the worst, right, you're already struggling. It probably can't be much worse than what we're already seeing. So, try some experiments, look to try and spread the wealth here. This Jets team with a more balanced top nine, I think, will have better chances of surviving the stretch. But again, we know the Jets can be stubborn. We know that they've had a plan. And if you can accuse them of one thing, or if you can't accuse them of one thing, it's being inconsistent. They are, dead set on this plan. They're riding it into the sunset. We'll see how far it takes them throughout the season. Would love to hear your thoughts on what you would even do with the bottom nine. What are your best suggestions? Who would you call up? What do you want to see? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. We'll see you next week with coverage of Winnipeg versus Edmonton and probably some brief Moose updates to see how they're doing. But like I said, that's all the time that we've got. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.